Hello and welcome to ENVU 3150, Environmental Decision Making. This is our Week 1 lecture. We're going to give a class overview and introduction to the material in the class. Our topics for this week's lecture are the class description and purpose, our learning objectives, the class schedule, class assignments, grading. Going to review some logistics, and then we're going to have a brief introduction to environmental decision making. This class is a very broad introduction to environmental decision making processes. We're going to look at some methodologies that can be applied in a number of different situations, and you're going to have a chance to practice these within the class. These methodologies are tried and true. They've been used in many thousands of applications, and you'll have a chance to learn them and apply them in a series of contemporary issues. The class will combine analytical methods drawn from decision sciences and applied ecology with insights from cognitive psychology, which enable us to understand our heuristics and biases. One of the goals is for you to be able to apply appropriate decision methodologies to both complex and simple environmental decisions. And we're going to look at a number of different decision-making scenarios, both complex and simple. And we're going to review different types of strategies that could be applied in each situation. We're going to look at normative, descriptive, and prescriptive decision strategies. And we're also going to look at the biases that affect those strategies, as well as something called choice architectures, how to design choices so that people make better environmental decisions. An important part of the class is exploring the implications of personal values, beliefs, and principles for effective decision making. And you'll have a chance at the end of the class to pull those together for yourself. Our learning objectives are relatively straightforward. We have 5 of them. The students who are most successful in this class will be able to differentiate among normative, descriptive, and prescriptive decision strategies. The students who are most successful will also be able to apply one of those strategies, an appropriate decision strategy, to an environmental issue. You will be able to articulate the values, beliefs, and principles that comprise a personal environmental philosophy. You will be able to justify an environmental decision outcome using rational, legal, and ethical criteria. And you will be able to explain how heuristics and biases affect environmental decisions. This is our schedule. As you can see, we have weekly discussion threads throughout the class. The class is a 10-week class. We have no class in week 5 and no class in week 8. In week 4, we have our first major assignment due, our rational decision-making paper. In week 7, we have our second major assignment due, which is the structured decision-making paper. And then in week 10, we have an environmental philosophy paper due, which is the final paper of the class, which is a combination of a reflective paper and a personal assessment based on your participation. You'll notice that each week we have discussion threads, and the discussion threads are very important to the class. In fact, a lot of the learning is going to take place in a group context within those threads. We're going to look at something at the very beginning of the class called the environmental paradox, and we're going to start off our decision-making studies with the rational approach, bounded rationality, and then we're going to understand how heuristics and biases affect the rational approach. We're then going to look at a method for complex decision-making, which is called structured decision-making. And after that, we are going to look at some approaches for what's known as choice architectures. Choice architectures is designing our environment and our organizations so that people will make better environmental decisions as part of ongoing operations. The first assignment is our rational decision-making paper. This is a 1,500 to 2,000 word paper. We are going to do an analysis, a rational analysis of an environmental issue. And this analysis is going to be used to support your decision concerning the issue, whether you're for it or against it. And you're going to apply cost-benefit analysis and bounded rationality. The purpose of this assignment is to give you some experience in applying a cost-benefit analysis framework and to understand what this framework does, what it doesn't do, and its strengths and weaknesses. Our second assignment is slightly more complex. It's a structured decision-making paper. Again, it's a 1,500 to 2,000 word assignment. The assignment is essentially looking at an environmental issue and then applying an expanded decision framework, which includes the different stages of the structured decision methodology. And the idea here is for you to gain an understanding of this methodology as well as its strengths and weaknesses, similar to the rational paper. However, this is a more complex and more involved approach. The third assignment is something I'd like you to keep in mind throughout the class. This assignment is a synthesis assignment. The goal is for you to clarify your values, beliefs, and principles that you use throughout the class, and then refine those into a personal environmental philosophy. And this philosophy is a major takeaway from the class because you will be able to use it as a set of criteria that you will take when moving forward in your life and making environmental decisions in both your personal and professional lives. As I said before, we have weekly discussion threads every week. This part of the class is very important because it's the core of our interaction, not only with me as the instructor, but with your classmates. And in fact, I'll be more of a guide and a facilitator and guide the interaction among the different members of the class. When you post, make sure that your post is a minimum of 150 words and that you demonstrate an understanding of the course concepts. The requirements for this class is that you must participate on 3 separate days at a minimum. This is because continual involvement with the class over time is essential for learning. If you post everything on one day and then don't come back for another week, that really doesn't foster the type of interactivity that the learning in this class needs. In order for you to understand some of these complex decision methodologies, it will require some incremental learning and some exchange among the different members of the class. So the more that you're involved with the class, the greater your learning will be. The quality criteria for posting are given in the class syllabus, so you can read them there. Again, make sure that you post a minimum of 150 words. If you use external sources, make sure that you are not just copying and pasting, but that you are citing the material and then summarizing it in your own words. The class grading is relatively straightforward. We have 8 weeks of discussion threads at 60 points, which is 480 points. Paper number 1 is 180 points. Paper number 2 is 180 points, and paper number 3 is 160 points. So there's a total of 1,000 points for the class. As you can see, your discussion threads are about half of your grade, and then your papers are the other half. The point score correlates to different letter grades as follows. This is the standard University of Denver grading scheme, and this will be applied in the class. So that's it for the class logistics, and now we're going to talk a little bit about environmental decision making. Well, environmental decision making happens in a number of different contexts. For this class, we're going to look at government, business, and individuals. And for our purposes, we're going to view both profit and non-profit individuals or businesses as, as components of the business sector. In other words, our non-profit organizations, such as Greenpeace, will be considered a business organization. And the government will be looking at strictly state, federal, and local governments. And then for individuals, we'll look at each person standing alone. So those are the three distinctions here that we're going to look at in terms of the types of environmental decisions that are being made. In the government, well, there's two types of environmental decisions. There's policy-based decisions and operations-based decisions. So the policy-based decisions are those decisions that result in regulations, fines, permits, fees. It results in the laws that govern the functioning of society and at different levels, whether it's local or state or federal. However, there's a second area of government which is similar to business, which is operations, and the operations of the government are indeed vast. And these decisions center around resource usage, including energy, water, and materials, waste disposal, and facilities design. So the government's kind of in a unique situation. It's regulating the society at large through the passage of laws and administrative schemes for fines and permits. It's also operating under those laws, and so there are two distinct types of decisions that need to be made. In terms of a business, the decisions are primarily operations-based, although the policies area varies a little bit, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. In a for-profit business, the focus is on internal operations. The operating policies, the resource usage similar to the government facilities, waste disposal. A key consideration is product and service design, because this determines not only the intention of how a product or service will function, but the design in effect determines its characteristics in terms of environmental impacts. And facilities design is another area of design that determine the impacts of a particular facility. For a nonprofit business, the policy area is a little bit more important, although there are still some very important decisions to be made about resource usage and waste disposal. The key, though, is the policies and the activities of the nonprofits are slightly different, because they tend to be advocacy organizations. Rather than providing a product or service, they provide an advocacy position. They may be primarily, as most of them are, educational in design. For individuals, our environmental decisions tend to be consumption-based, purchasing and consuming food, clothing, housing, transportation, entertainment. Civic involvement as well, whatever we're doing, being involved and functioning under the particular system of governance that we have. And so this is the overall context within which environmental decisions are made. One of the important presuppositions of this class is that our inner reality guides our decision making. Our values, beliefs, and perceptions determine what types of decisions we make. They, in effect, provide a mental hardware or hardwiring for making decisions. This hardwiring is subject to limitations, and so we are, as decision makers, subject to cognitive limitations because our inner reality tends to be biased. And there are ways to overcome these limitations and make better decisions. The first step is to be aware of what these limitations are, what the biases are. The second is to implement an appropriate strategy that results in a more objective and inclusive process. And then the third step is to practice that strategy. And eventually what you want to do as a decision maker is design your own internal choice architecture, something that you will use time and time again. It will become almost second nature, It becomes part of your subconscious programming, so that your awareness is more inclusive, it's more objective, and you are aware of the effects of any biases that you may be inducing as a result of your preferred method of making decisions. In this class, the first approach we're going to look at is something called normative models, and these are the textbook or ideal methods for making decisions. They're based on classical economic theory. And there are two assumptions for the normative models. The one is that environmental decision makers will have perfect information. They will know everything there is to know about a situation. And the second is that environmental decision makers will have stable preferences, which they will use as the basis for assessing alternatives. And that they will use the rules of logic and apply them rationally to make the decision. And the way that these rules will be applied is that the decision makers will assess the costs and benefits of alternatives and then select one alternative that maximizes their own utility. And so this is a pretty straight ahead classical economic approach, cost benefit, based on utility maximization. And this is what is taught in every standard economics course. However, what we are seeing out there in the world is that this is not really the case. This is an ideal approach. One of the first areas that we see that really changes our perception of how the rational model works is something called bounded rationality. And this is where we enter into the term called satisficing. And bounded rationality means that the assumptions of the classical normative model are changed. And so the new assumptions become that the best choice that we make is always based on imperfect information, limited resources, or limited cognitive ability. So what the decision makers do is they use available and relevant information, and that the number of alternatives and characteristics that we consider within the decision process is limited or bounded by the specific circumstances. And so we can see with the satisficing approach that we're beginning to alter the ideal model or the classical economic model of utility maximization because we are starting to acknowledge our human limitations. We can't know everything. We do have limited ability. We have limited time, energy, and money to gather information. And so what we tend to do is we tend to use what we have at hand, do the best we can. And in certain circumstances, we just may not have all the information we need. However, we still need to make a decision. So we take the satisficing approach. The next part of our class is going to cover descriptive models. And once we've understood the strengths and limitations of the rational model, we're going to really take a very close look at how people actually make decisions. We're going to cover something called prospect theory, which is based on loss aversion due to two biases, the status quo bias and the framing bias. We're going to look at heuristics or rules of thumb that we use to make decisions. The heuristics that we're going to learn about are called availability, representativeness, anchoring and adjustment, and then effect and dual processing. And then we're going to look at some biases, which are distorted perceptions of reality that result in distorted decisions. We're going to look at the optimism bias, something called evaluability, following the herd, the spotlight effect, and then discounting and the present bias. And so this part of the class gives us a relatively good handle on what's actually happening as opposed to the theoretical ideal of what should happen. The third part of the class, we're going to cover prescriptive models. And these are models, just like a prescription, to help make people healthier. These models will help people to make better environmental decisions. And the first one we're going to look at is something called structured decision making. And this is when the problem is complex and there are multiple stakeholders. This is a great approach to use. In this approach, we first define the problem. We determine our objectives. What do we want to achieve by making the decision? We generate a list of alternatives. We then also understand what the consequences of the decision will be. Then we make trade-offs among those alternatives. We look at how uncertain these consequences are to happen, as well as what are the specific consequences associated with each alternative and how uncertain these specific consequences are to happen. Then we're going to look at our risk tolerance as decision makers, and then understand what decisions are linked to the particular decision at hand. So this is a rather long and involved process. This will be your second paper. The second type of prescriptive models are something called implicit methods to help people make better environmental decisions. And we know these as nudges. In fact, one of our textbook is called Nudge. We're going to look at 4 methods: feedback, goals, commitment, and defaults, which are, when used, effective methods for getting people to make simple environmental decisions that benefit not only themselves but stakeholders. So in conclusion, our class will be challenging. It will also be fun. We're going to explore some rather contentious issues, and so it will be interesting to see what everyone's opinion is about this, and understand how our opinions got formed and where they came from. And in doing so, what we want to do is develop our opinions. And so make sure that you support your opinion with data, cite the source of the data. So I will be expecting you to go and do research in the DU library or on the internet, and then cite the source of validated data that supports your particular assertions or conclusions. In this class, it's very important to participate often. And as you participate, seek first to understand, not to be understood. So ask questions of your fellow students. Make sure that you understand their perspectives, because you may be able to get a good handle on something that will enhance your learning and enhance your worldview based on what someone else has done and how they perceive the world. A core class goal is an awareness of your environmental values, beliefs, and principles. And these are the basis of how you make environmental decisions. And these will emerge over the 10 weeks of the class and will be documented in the final paper. So keep this in mind as we go through the class. You can ask yourself, what is important to me about this situation? What do I believe to be true about the situation? And what principle can I apply to this particular situation? And so as you go through, we're going to be looking at quite a few different scenarios. I think we've got something like 7 different scenarios. And so as you assess each scenario and develop your assessments, just keep these questions in mind. What's important about this for me? What do I believe to be true about this situation for me? And what principle could I apply here that really is important and that I believe to be true, and not only in this situation but in many situations. So that's it for our introduction, and we will see you in the discussion threads.